Hello everyone. Starting with this video, we will be going back and covering some more fundamental concepts. The topic here will be how to handle operations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with negative numbers. To make clear what numbers are negative in this video, I will be putting the negative sign and the number inside a set of parentheses. Use of parentheses is often helpful when dealing with negatives, no matter what your skill level. To begin, let's see how we add negative numbers. Put simply, the addition of a negative number turns into subtraction of the positive version of that number. Let's go through some examples to see this in action. First off, consider 24 plus a negative 10. Following our rule, adding negative 10 to 24 should be the same as taking 24 and subtracting 10 from it. Now 24 minus 10 we should be easily able to do, and this will give us 14. Next up, consider 50 plus a negative 15. We'll do the same thing. Adding this negative 15 turns into 50 now minus 15. Subtracting 15 from 50 will end up giving us 35. So this is how we handle a positive plus a negative number, but what about the other way around? Taking a negative plus a positive. Consider negative 3 plus 12. Well, we are just adding two numbers here, so let's remember that addition is commutative, meaning we can just swap the order of the numbers, keeping the addition, and write it like this, 12 plus a negative 3. By switching the order like this, we can see we can do the same thing we've been doing up until now. We are adding a negative 3, so this should turn into 12 minus 3. Doing this will give us 9, and that's our answer. Next up, we have subtraction. The subtraction of a negative number turns into addition of the positive version of that number. For some examples here, now consider 24 minus a negative 10. Following our rule, we have 24 minus a negative 10 should turn into addition of 10. Then we can do 24 plus 10, which simply gives us 34. Next up, consider 50 minus negative 15. Again, we'll end up with subtraction of a negative 15 turns into plus 15. Then 50 plus 15 will give us 65. Now, what about a negative number minus another negative number? Well, for the first step, let's just follow our rule that we'll take the first number, the negative 15, and leave it like that, but then the subtraction of the negative 20 we will turn into plus 20. Now we have a negative number plus a positive number, which is something we saw on our previous examples. We can do the same thing here where we simply switch the order, giving us 20 plus a negative 15 from the commutative property of addition. Now we are adding a negative 15, which from our rule of addition tells us that this turns into 20 minus 15, and this will end up giving us 5. Now for multiplication. For multiplication, we can multiply the two numbers like normal. The only thing that changes when negatives are involved is we have to pay attention to what sign we should end up with, positive or negative. For multiplication of like signs, that is a positive times another positive, or a negative times another negative, the product will be positive. On the other hand, for multiplication of opposite signs, so a positive times a negative, or a negative times a positive, the product in these cases will be negative. Let's take a look at some examples. Consider 2 times 3, which we should recognize will just end up giving us 6. We know this result, but we can also think about it as a positive times a positive, meaning we have like signs, should end up giving us a positive result, and that's what we see here. But now let's introduce some negatives into this situation. Consider negative 2 times positive 3. Again, we can just multiply the two numbers together. 2 times 3 gives us 6. But we must account for any signs. we have a negative times a positive, so opposite signs, and for cases like that, our end result should end up being negative. So negative 2 times positive 3 gives us negative 6. For 2 times negative 3, we have a similar scenario where we can just do 2 times 3 is 6. But for the signs, we have a positive times a negative, so opposite signs, and in this case, we have a negative result. So our answer should be negative 6 again. Then finally, negative 2 times negative 3. Taking the 2 times 3 should give us 6. But thinking about the signs, a negative times a negative, we are multiplying like signs, and for this situation, we should come out with an overall positive sign, leaving us with a positive 6 here. Next up, we have division. Division of negative numbers follows the same rules as multiplication. Division of like signs, so a positive divided by a positive, or a negative divided by a negative, will give us an overall positive result. But for opposite signs, a positive divided by a negative, or a negative divided by a positive, we will end up with an overall negative sign in our answer. Let's take a look at some examples. 10 divided by 5, we should know is simply 2. But then, once we start getting some negatives involved, let's take a look at negative 10 divided by positive 5. Doing the division of the numbers like normal, 10 over 5 still gives us 2. But paying attention to our signs, we have a negative divided by a positive, so opposite signs, leaving us with an overall negative sign in our answer. We'll see the same thing for 10 divided by negative 5. 10 divided by 5 is still 2. We have a positive divided by a negative, so we're dividing opposite signs, which means we have an overall negative in our result. And finally, negative 10 divided by negative 5. Taking the numbers 10 divided by 5 still gives us 2. But the signs, we have a negative divided by a negative, so like signs, and in that case we say the negatives either cancel out or just leave an overall positive sign, giving us an answer of 2 again. To wrap up, let's also mention the rules for raising a negative number to an exponent. This is actually an extension of the rules for multiplication. To see how the rule comes about, consider negative 2 raised to the 2 power. Recall raising to a power just means we are taking the number, in this case negative 2, and multiplying it by itself the exponent number of times. So here we have negative 2 times negative 2. Doing 2 times 2 gives us 4. Then paying attention to the signs, we have a negative times a negative, which means our result should be an overall positive sign. So we get positive 4 when we square our negative 2. But watch what happens when we now raise our negative 2 to a third power. This will now be negative 2 times itself 3 times. We know the first pair of multiplication just became 4, so that is now multiplied by negative 2. Taking 4 times 2 will give us 8, but we have opposite signs, a positive times a negative here, so we should end up with an overall negative sign. If we kept going like this, we would see that a pattern emerges. Taking a negative number and multiplying it by itself an even number of times will give a positive result. Meanwhile, doing it an odd amount of times will give a negative result. So the way we can write this rule is if we have a negative number raised to an even power, it will give the same result as taking the positive version of that number raised to the same power, leaving us with a positive number. Meanwhile, if we take a negative number and raise it to an odd power, we will end up with an overall negative of the positive version of that number raised to the same power. And with that, we've covered the basic operations involving negative numbers. Until next time.